Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a stack of sources and really digging into Sean Combs, Diddy,
Mhm.
looking at his life, his experiences, but through a pretty specific lens based on this material.
Exactly. And that lens, looking at the sources you shared, it's really about trying to uncover insights into, well, his resilience, how he responds to challenges, and yeah, that includes major legal situations. The material seems very focused on his upbringing and also the influence of his team.
Right, the people around him. So the sources we're drawing on here, it's quite a mix. We've got psychological takes on parenting, personal growth. Then there are biographical accounts, obviously, and some interesting analyses that look at current events, maybe difficult ones, through this idea of resilience and brain management.
It's a fascinating collection, and the material, it pretty consistently suggests that if you really want to understand someone's path, especially how they handle tough times, you really have to start way back, look at those formative years.
Absolutely. So digging into those biographical sources, provided the books, the biographical stuff, Wikipedia entries even, what kind of picture do they paint of his early life?
Well, they definitely highlight his start in Harlem. And, his father passing away when Sean was just a kid, that's a major point. They paint this picture of a very determined young person, influenced strongly by his mother, very driven even back then. The sources seem to suggest that dealing with that loss, the whole environment he grew up in, it instilled a certain grit, ambition. That really became fundamental later on.
And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. One source, it's the psychological piece, looks at how his own childhood might affect how he parents. It directly links some of those early experiences, things around structure, independence, directly to his later parenting approach.
Yes, and building on that, there's another source, framed more like a psychologist's perspective. It explores how those early years weren't just like setting a direction, but actively shaped his ongoing personal development. It
Right.
kind of posits that navigating those early challenges, it becomes this continuous process of self-improvement, and that impacts how he might handle pressure, much later in life.
Okay, so taking that foundation, his upbringing, let's layer on some of the psychological insights from the sources, regarding his traits, his behaviors.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how this material specifically connects those early experiences to developing emotional intelligence. It's quite explicit in one source. It suggests that the way you learn to cope with stress, with difficult feelings in childhood, that can seriously influence your emotional intelligence down the road.
And do the sources point to how that might, actually show up, how it manifests?
Exactly. They suggest that someone whose resilience was kind of forged early on, they might show certain coping mechanisms under pressure, maybe like a strong drive to maintain control or a real focus on problem solving, or even just specific ways of managing stress that they learned way back. The material isn't just saying there's a link, it's sort of implying how those early lessons could play out in later responses.
That connection,
Oh,
early life shaping later coping styles.
yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And this brings us to a really unique perspective in one of the sources we looked at, a piece called Resilience, Brand, and Personal Growth.
Mm.
It basically proposes viewing a really challenging situation, like a legal battle, getting intense public attention, not just as a legal thing, but maybe as a chance for self-development. Even, it says, a masterclass in resilience and brand management.
Yeah, that shifts the focus quite dramatically, doesn't it? Instead of only looking at the legal ins and outs. This source says, let's look at how he responds. It argues, look, someone like Sean Combs, who built this massive global brand basically from nothing, he's already shown huge resilience throughout his career, overcoming lots of obstacles.
So the focus becomes the actual process of navigating the challenge.
Precisely. The source even lays out specific things to analyze within that situation. One is public perception and brand management. How does he use his existing brand? What are the damage control strategies we can see? How's the reputation management playing out in real time? The source suggests treating this as a live case study in handling public image during a major crisis.
Right, so it becomes almost like a study in crisis comms and branding under extreme fire.
Absolutely. And another area the source highlights is emotional intelligence. Again, it asks questions like, how is he managing what must be immense emotional stress? Can we see signs of emotional regulation, self-compassion, emotional maturity. In his public actions or even what's reported privately, it's looking at coping mechanisms under the highest possible pressure.
And his leadership style during all this is also brought up.
Yes, the source frames that as a study in crisis leadership, too. How does he lead his team through it? Is he inspiring loyalty? How is productivity kept up inside his organization when there's all this external chaos? It's examining leadership when the stakes are incredibly high.
And adaptability. Pivoting.
Crucially, yes. The source points out that adversity often forces you to change tactics, adapt really quickly, maybe even reinvent parts of yourself or your brand. It's all about flexibility under extreme stress. The material really makes a strong case that by focusing on these responses, the personal, the professional, the emotional navigation, you get a unique and potentially really valuable perspective on resilience and growth, something that goes way beyond just the legal outcome.
Okay, so putting all this together, this material seems to be saying that while Sean Combs is the one in the spotlight, navigating these challenges, his responses aren't just happening in isolation. They're shaped by, it seems, two big things: the people around him, his team, and those really foundational experiences from his upbringing we talked about.
That's a really critical insight from these sources, yeah. They suggest that to understand his response, you have to look at the team. And that means, well, identifying who the key players are: managers, lawyers, PR people, advisors, researching their backgrounds a bit, analyzing what their specific roles seem to be in managing the brand, the crisis itself, the legal parts.
So kind of looking for patterns in his actions that might mirror their influence or expertise.
Exactly. Are there shifts in strategy, changes in messaging that seem to line up with the known approaches of his advisors? The sources suggest watching for those patterns gives you clues. And underpinning everything, always, is the impact of upbringing. The psychological analysis directly connects those early experiences, the resilience that was built, the coping skills developed. It links them straight to how someone navigates a crisis like this under intense public watch.
It's really clear how those foundational pieces are seen as crucial here. The sources even list the kinds of materials they use to build this specific angle. Things like, biographies, autobiographies for personal context, journalistic investigations for the detailed accounts, academic research on things like brand management or crisis communication for frameworks. Interviews with experts, too.
Right. Interviews, archival footage to kind of illustrate his journey, and even public records, legal documents for the factual basis. All these layers build up that richer picture. It's definitely a powerful framework for analysis. It moves beyond just the immediate headlines to try and understand the dynamics underneath.
And as we sort of wrap up this deep dive, we want to connect this back to you, listening.
Yeah, maybe consider the concepts we've just talked through. Why is understanding resilience, or the really deep impact of your background and the influence of the people you have around you? Why is that relevant for anyone facing challenges? Because, well, we all face them, don't we? Learning how maybe your upbringing shaped your ways of coping, how your support system or lack of one affects your path, how you can maybe view tough times not just as setbacks, but maybe as chances to grow. These are pretty universal lessons, I think. It's really about navigating the pressures in your own life, whatever size they are, and trying to keep your integrity and just keep moving forward.
So this deep dive into the sources really shows us that looking at a life, especially through this lens of upbringing, psychology, team influence, particularly during difficult times, it can offer some pretty profound insights. Insights into resilience, brand management, and that ongoing process of personal growth.
And it leaves us maybe with a final thought for you to consider, something like this. How do the unique experiences from your past and the influence of the really key people in your life, how do they shape the way you navigate the specific challenges and pressures you're facing right now?